The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Marcus Webb, 42, a federal maritime investigator with the Coast Guard, stared at the HOA violation notice taped to his boat trailer. $500 for parking his work vessel, a 23-foot inspection boat with official U.S. government markings, in his own driveway. 3 months he'd lived in Riverside Estates. 3 months of watching HOA President Linda Whitmore patrol the neighborhood like she owned every blade of grass. She'd left notes before, passive-aggressive reminders about community standards. But this was different. This was a legal threat against federal property, and what Linda didn't know, what she was about to discover in the most humiliating way possible, was that Marcus didn't just work for the government. He had enforcement authority that made her little HOA kingdom look like a sandbox. But tonight, everything was about to change. Before we dive into how Marcus turned a petty HOA violation into a federal education, if you love stories where entitled people finally meet someone they can't bully, hit that like button and subscribe. Now, let's see exactly how this unfolded. This is a story in 3 parts. The violation that pushed a federal officer too far, the confrontation where a HOA president discovered what real authority looks like, and the resolution where an entire neighborhood learned the difference between rules and laws. For months, Marcus had endured Linda's escalating power trips. The passive-aggressive notes evolved into threats, the threats into citations, and the citations into a court summons. Every attempt at reasonable explanation met with condescension and dismissal. Marcus watched other neighbors cave to her demands, saw good people intimidated into compliance. The breaking point came when Linda didn't just threaten him. She threatened to have his federal vessel towed as abandoned property. That's when the patient investigator decided it was time to investigate. The confrontation happened in the one place Linda felt most powerful, the HOA violation hearing she'd orchestrated. Surrounded by her board members, armed with bylaws and procedures, she expected another easy victory. What she got instead was a masterclass in federal jurisdiction. Marcus didn't just defend himself. He systematically dismantled her authority, revealed her multiple violations of actual law, and demonstrated what happens when someone confuses a homeowners association with legitimate government power. The resolution came swifter than anyone expected. What started as Linda's attempt to flex on a new homeowner ended with federal investigators examining HOA financial records, state authorities reviewing potential fraud charges, and a neighborhood finally free from tyrannical rule. Sometimes justice doesn't come from fighting within a corrupt system. It comes from revealing that system never had real power to begin with. Here's exactly how it happened. Marcus Webb had purchased the corner lot house in Riverside Estates specifically for the extra driveway space. As a federal maritime investigator, he needed room for the 23-foot inspection boat he used for harbor patrols and vessel compliance checks. The position required him to respond to calls at irregular hours, which meant keeping the boat ready and accessible. At 42, after 16 years with the Coast Guard, Marcus had learned to value efficiency and preparation. He was meticulous, professional, and deeply familiar with maritime law, federal regulations, and the jurisdictional authority that came with his badge. The house had seemed perfect until he met Linda Whitmore. Linda ran Riverside Estates HOA like a personal fiefdom. She was 56, unemployed since her divorce settlement 2 years prior, and had found purpose in the power of her HOA presidency. She drove through the neighborhood every morning in her white Lexus, documenting violations with her phone camera. Trash cans left out past 7 a.m., grass exceeding 3 inches, cars parked on streets overnight. She'd perfected the art of the surprise inspection and the threatening letter. Most residents had learned to simply comply. It was easier than fighting. The first note appeared 3 days after Marcus moved in. A printed card tucked under his windshield wiper. Reminder, commercial vehicles prohibited per HOA bylaws section 4.7. Marcus had examined the boat, covered with its official tarp, clearly marked with U.S. Coast Guard identification numbers. Not commercial, federal. He dismissed it as a misunderstanding. 2 weeks later, the note escalated. This time it was in his mailbox, typed on official HOA letterhead. Final warning, remove commercial watercraft within 48 hours or face citation. Marcus had called the HOA office, explained his position, described the federal exemptions that superseded HOA rules. The office manager, clearly intimidated by Linda, had promised to pass along the message. Nothing changed. The third incident happened on a Saturday morning when Marcus was preparing for a harbor inspection. He'd emerged from his house at 6 a.m. to find Linda standing in his driveway, photographing his boat from multiple angles. When he'd approached to explain, again, that this was government property used for federal law enforcement, she'd cut him off. "I don't care if it's the president's boat," she'd snapped. "You signed the HOA agreement. These are our rules. Remove it or I'll have it towed." The contempt in her voice, the absolute certainty that her authority was unquestionable, had struck Marcus as almost impressive in its delusion. That's when the pattern became clear. This wasn't about rules. This was about control. Marcus had dealt with enough petty tyrants in his career to recognize the type. Linda needed to win. She needed compliance. And she'd targeted him because he was new, because she assumed a federal employee would be too busy to fight back, because she'd never encountered someone who actually understood jurisdiction. Marcus tried the official route first. He'd contacted the HOA board directly, requesting a hearing to present federal exemption documentation. Linda had responded personally. "The board has reviewed your case. Violation stands. Pay the fine or face legal action." No hearing, no review, just her decision presented as board consensus. He'd even tried reasoning with neighbors who served on the board. Tom Chen, the vice president, had been apologetic but resigned. "Look, man, I get it, but Linda runs this place. She has all the records, all the contacts. Last guy who challenged her got hit with 12 different violations until he just sold and moved. It's not worth it." The fear in Tom's voice had told Marcus everything. This wasn't an HOA. It was an authoritarian regime in miniature. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon. Marcus returned from a 3-day assignment inspecting commercial fishing vessels to find an orange sticker plastered across his boat's windshield. "Abandoned property. Will be TOWED in 48 hours per County Ordinance 34-7B. Below that, Linda's signature and a note. "Final opportunity to comply. Tow company has been contacted." Marcus stood in his driveway, reading the notice, feeling something shift inside him. She wasn't just threatening him anymore. She was threatening to impound federal property. That crossed a line from HOA overreach into potential criminal territory. Interference with federal operations. Theft of government assets. Linda had just escalated this into his jurisdiction. He spent that evening making calls, not to lawyers or HOA mediators, but to his own agency. By midnight, he had documentation, legal precedents, and a very clear understanding of what was about to happen. If Linda wanted to play jurisdiction games, Marcus would show her what real authority looked like. And on Monday morning, when the HOA violation hearing was scheduled, everything was finally ready. The HOA meeting room in the community center felt deliberately intimidating. Linda sat at the head of a long table, flanked by 3 board members who looked distinctly uncomfortable. Tom Chen, the vice president, avoided eye contact. Margaret Foster, the treasurer, shuffled papers nervously. David Park, the secretary, stared at his phone. Behind them, a projector displayed the HOA bylaws in bullet points. Linda had dressed for the occasion, business suit, reading glasses on a chain leather portfolio open before her. She looked like a judge. She was about to learn she wasn't. Marcus entered at exactly 9 a.m., carrying a single folder. He wore his Coast Guard investigator uniform, dark blue with badge and insignia clearly visible. Linda's eyes narrowed when she saw it, but her expression remained smug. "Mr. Webb, thank you for finally attending. We have significant violations to discuss." "Actually," Marcus said, settling into the chair across from her, his voice calm and measured, "we have federal law to discuss, but please proceed with your violations first." Linda launched into her presentation with practiced authority. She clicked through photos of his boat on the projector. "Section 4.7 of Riverside Estates bylaws clearly prohibits commercial vehicles. Your watercraft has been in violation for 92 days. The initial fine was $500. With late fees and legal processing, you now owe $2,300. Additionally, you face daily fines of $100 until the vessel is removed." Marcus nodded slowly. And you sent a tow notice claiming abandoned property under County Ordinance 3047B. Correct. The tow company will arrive Wednesday if payment isn't received. Interesting. Marcus opened his folder, pulled out a single sheet. Let's talk about that county ordinance. I pulled the actual text. It applies exclusively to vehicles on public roads abandoned for more than 30 days with expired registration. My boat is on private property, my property with current federal registration. So you've committed fraud by misrepresenting a county law. He slid the document across the table. That's a misdemeanor in this state. Linda's confident expression flickered. That's irrelevant to HOA violations. We'll come back to relevance. Marcus pulled out another document. Now about your authority to find federal property. I'm a GS-12 federal maritime investigator. My boat is U.S. government property, registration number CG2847, assigned to me for official law enforcement duties. Federal law, specifically Title 33 U.S.C. Section 1, establishes Coast Guard authority and exempts federal vessels from local regulations. Your HOA agreement, which I did sign, contains standard language subordinating all bylaws to federal and state law. I'm sure you read that section. The board members exchanged glances. Tom cleared his throat. Linda, maybe we should. I read it, Linda interrupted, her voice hardening. Exemptions apply to active duty. You park here, you live here. That makes it personal use. Marcus smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. Let me educate you on federal investigator assignments. I'm on 24-hour call. I respond directly from home to maritime incidents. Last month alone, I conducted 7 emergency inspections requiring immediate boat deployment. This isn't personal use. This is operational readiness. But let's say you're right. Let's say I'm wrong about federal exemption. He pulled out another document. I filed a formal complaint with the Federal Protective Service 3 days ago, citing HOA interference with federal operations. They opened case file FPS 20248834. That's a federal investigation now, Linda. The blood drained from her face. You can't do that. I already did, and when federal investigators started reviewing your HOA, they found some interesting things. Marcus laid out 3 more pages. Your HOA has collected approximately $430,000 in fees and fines over the past 2 years. Your filed tax returns show only $280,000 in declared income. That's a $150,000 discrepancy. The IRS is very interested in that math. Margaret, the treasurer, went pale. I gave you all the records, Linda. I told you we needed proper accounting. Shut up, Linda hissed. Marcus continued, his voice never rising, every word precisely delivered. We also found 12 violations you personally issued that contradict county and state law. Fining the Johnsons for a wheelchair ramp, that's ADA discrimination. Citing the Patels for religious decorations, First Amendment violation. Threatening to tow Mrs. Chen's car because she parked on the street during chemotherapy appointments, that's potentially elder abuse. You've been running this HOA like a personal extortion operation, and you just made the mistake of targeting someone with actual investigative authority. Linda's hands trembled. This is harassment. You're abusing your position. Am I? Marcus leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to withdraw every violation you've issued to me. You're going to resign from the HOA board effective immediately. And you're going to cooperate with the federal and state investigations into HOA financial management. Or, he pulled out one final document, I file formal charges for interference with federal operations, fraud, and misrepresentation of legal authority. That's 3 to 5 years federal prison time. The room fell silent. Tom found his voice first. Linda, resign, please, just resign. Linda's carefully constructed authority crumbled visibly. Her hands shook as she reached for her water glass. You can't prove any of this. Marcus tapped his badge. I investigate maritime fraud for a living. Finding financial irregularities is literally my job, and I'm very, very good at it. He stood, collecting his documents. You have until 5 p.m. today to submit your resignation letter. After that, I forward my complete investigation file to the state attorney general. Your choice. He walked to the door, then turned back. One more thing, every resident you've illegally fined over the past 2 years, I'm providing them with documentation to sue for damages. You wanted to run this neighborhood like a dictator. Congratulations. Now you face consequences like one. Marcus left the room, leaving Linda sitting in stunned silence. Her empire of petty power demolished in 15 minutes by someone who actually understood what authority meant. The resignation letter arrived in the HOA office email at 4:47 p.m. Linda Whitmore, citing personal reasons, effective immediately. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a terse two-sentence email that ended a 2-year reign of intimidation. Tom Chen, suddenly thrust into the acting president role, called an emergency board meeting that evening. Marcus attended not as a defendant, but as a concerned resident with expertise to offer. The meeting revealed the full scope of Linda's operation. Margaret, the treasurer, finally felt safe enough to speak openly. For months, Linda had controlled all financial records, refusing to share complete statements even with board members. She'd issued fines without board votes, pocketed late fees as administrative costs, and created a climate of fear that prevented oversight. The missing $150,000 represented years of unaccounted cash payments, inflated contractor invoices, and legal fees paid to her cousin's law office for services never rendered. The neighborhood transformation happened swiftly. Within a week, Tom had organized a genuine board vote. The bylaws were reviewed, amended, and brought into compliance with state law. The discriminatory rules, the ones targeting wheelchairs, religious symbols, and medical necessities, were struck immediately. Residents who'd been living under constant threat of violations emerged with stories of Linda's abuse. The Johnsons, elderly and disabled, had nearly bankrupted themselves paying fines for their accessibility ramp. The Patels had considered moving rather than face religious discrimination. Mrs. Chen, battling cancer, had been terrorized with tow threats during her treatment. Marcus spent hours compiling documentation for each family. His investigative training made the process efficient. He cross-referenced Linda's violation notices with actual county and state codes, highlighted every legal discrepancy, and provided residents with ironclad cases for small claims court. 17 families filed suits within a month. Linda's legal defense collapsed quickly when her own documentation proved the violations were baseless. The federal investigation moved with bureaucratic precision. The Federal Protective Service, initially interested only in the interference with Marcus's federal vessel, expanded their scope when they discovered the financial irregularities. The IRS audit came next. Linda had treated HOA funds as personal income, failing to maintain proper nonprofit accounting. The state attorney general's office added fraud charges. Linda, who'd wielded her HOA presidency like a weapon, now faced 3 separate legal proceedings. The true reckoning came 6 weeks after Marcus's confrontation. Linda appeared in small claims court to defend against the Johnsons' lawsuit, the first of many. She arrived alone, without legal representation she could no longer afford. The judge reviewed Marcus's documentation, the ADA requirements Linda had ignored, the fraudulent citations, the intimidation tactics. The ruling took 12 minutes. The Johnsons were awarded full reimbursement of all fines plus damages. 15 similar rulings followed over the next month. Marcus encountered Linda one final time in the courthouse hallway after the Patels' victory. She looked diminished, exhausted, the arrogance completely gone. She stopped when she saw him, seemed about to speak, then simply walked past. No apology, no acknowledgement, just defeat. But the transformation in Riverside Estates was profound. The HOA, under Tom's reluctant but fair leadership, became what it should have been, a community organization managing shared resources, not an authoritarian regime. Residents planted gardens without fear. Wheelchair ramps appeared on 3 more homes. Religious holidays were celebrated openly. Mrs. Chen, cancer-free, planted flowers in her front yard that exceeded the old height restrictions. Nobody cited her. Marcus's boat remained in his driveway, its federal markings visible to anyone who cared to look. He'd added a small plaque near the registration numbers. Protected under Title 33 U.S.C. Section 1. Not out of spite, but as education. Several neighbors asked about his work now. He'd explained federal maritime law, vessel inspections, the jurisdictional complexities most people never considered. Some found it fascinating. All found it reassuring to have someone knowledgeable in the neighborhood. 2 months after the confrontation, on a Saturday morning, Marcus was washing his boat when Tom approached, carrying a manila envelope. "Thought you'd want to see this," Tom said, handing it over. Inside were the final financial audit results. The missing funds totaled $173,000. Linda had agreed to a repayment plan as part of her plea deal. It would take her 15 years. "She's working retail now," Tom added quietly. "At the mall, minimum wage. The judge structured the repayment to take almost her entire paycheck after basic expenses." He paused. "Is that justice or just revenge?" Marcus considered the question seriously. Justice is proportional consequence. She terrorized families for years, stole from her community, used authority she never legitimately had to make people afraid in their own homes. Now she faces years of accountability. That's not revenge. That's what happens when someone mistakes power for authority and discovers the difference. Tom nodded slowly. "The new bylaws are working. People are actually happy here now. We're getting volunteers for committees, residents attending meetings because they want to, not because they're afraid. It's what a community should be." He glanced at the boat. "Thank you for not just paying the fine and moving on. Most people would have." Marcus smiled. "Most people don't carry a federal badge. When you have real authority, you have an obligation to use it correctly." Linda forgot that authority requires legitimacy. An HOA presidency isn't a dictatorship, it's a service position. He returned to washing his boat. "Besides, I'm stubborn, and I really like this driveway." As Tom walked away, Marcus reflected on what had changed. It wasn't just Linda's removal or the HOA reform. It was the broader lesson the neighborhood had learned, that bullies rely on their victims' silence, that small-scale tyranny survives only when good people don't fight back, and that sometimes justice requires someone willing to use their authority not for personal gain, but for genuine accountability. Marcus finished washing his boat, then stepped back to examine his work. The federal markings gleamed in the sunlight. Somewhere, he knew, Linda was working a retail shift, facing her own consequences. Here, in Riverside Estates, families were living without fear, building ramps and planting gardens and parking boats in their driveways. He'd learned that sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom or a law book. Sometimes it comes from refusing to be intimidated, from understanding the system supposedly controlling you, and from recognizing that real authority isn't about power over people. It's about protecting them from those who abuse it. And as Marcus stood there in the driveway that had caused so much trouble, enjoying the peace Linda's absence had created, he smiled. Because justice, whether delivered with a federal badge or a resigned email, was equally satisfying when it finally arrived. 3 states away in Portland, Oregon, retired Army Corps of Engineers specialist Diane Martinez received a letter from her condo association demanding she remove her rooftop rain collection system. The system she designed using federal environmental guidelines. The system that had won a state sustainability award. The condo president, armed with a newly invented aesthetic violations policy, expected compliance within 30 days. Diane smiled, the same calculating smile that once preceded infrastructure projects in 12 countries, and pulled out her engineering certifications, state permits, and direct phone line to the EPA regional director she'd worked with for 20 years. "Please," she said quietly into her phone, "let them try to enforce this. I haven't dismantled an illegitimate authority structure in almost 6 months." The condo president had no idea what he'd just started. But that's a story for another time.